Welcome back to the last class of Kingdom School of the Bride. This is the lesson for the fifth watch. It's called Daughters of Sarah. And so it's going into an introductory verses. And this kind of is building on from our last lesson where we ended it talking about submission is the seventh and the highest quality of being taught to women of being a bride. And obviously, we talked about that in our relationship with Jesus. Now we're going to learn about Sarah, who well, let's get into it and then we'll talk more. So it says, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. So, Sarah actually is a prominent figure in the New Testament, where it says that we are children of Sarah. I mean, actually, Paul talks about us in a whole eschatological framework as being of the daughters of Sarah, not the children of Hagar per se. Um, in the way he talked about them in the parable and how he used them to teach and about free and being bond slave. So Sarah remains this figure in the New Testament of not only salvation, but we see also that wives are aiming to be daughters of Sarah. She is the image of the bride, the wife. And so, just like we're taking the instruction given to women and given to people, given to women as being wives, and relating that to our relationship with Jesus. So we see once again that submission. They would adorn themselves and they made themselves holy by being submissive to their own husbands. Now, also at the end, this what's important says we are her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. Now, that phrase, if you do what is right, is important. Okay. Because right in this sense is not just talking about a general moral standard, it's a continuation of what he's been talking about, and that's being submissive to their own husbands. So he's really talking about being submissive to your husband without any fear, without being frightened by any fear, which is a very important concept in our relationship with Jesus. Are we able to be submissive to Jesus without being frightened by any fear, deterring us from that submission? And as much as many people like to make faith in Christ not really about what's right and wrong, what's right and wrong plays a huge factor into being a bride, being a wife, being the bride of Christ. Why? Because we're moving on. Like we said, we talked about in the last lesson, these seven standards given to the wife. Where the least of them was loving your husband, which equates to keeping his commandments, his general revelation of his morality. And the greatest of it was being subject or being submissive to the husband. So when we talk about submission, we are moving on, we're moving forward, moving on. So when we talk about what's doing right, we're not talking about the commandments. We're talking about being submissive, doing whatever your husband tells you to do. Now, I have examples of this with Sarah I want to get into. We're not going to talk that much, but I'm really just going to give the examples. So we have how he followed him from Ur to Canaan. Sarah left her homeland and family without recorded objection when God called Abraham to go to an unknown land. No objection. You don't hear any recorded conversation from her. And trust me, in this Bible, when women have something to say or they object or there's some type of quarrel, it's recorded. It's not recorded with Sarah. She left behind her homeland, her family. She left behind everything. When God told Abraham to do, who was Abram at the time, told him to do what he was supposed to do, she followed without fear. And this is where I say sometimes there's a conflict with submission to the voice of the Lord and the general revelation of morality, but the voice of the Lord triumphs over that. We have to understand that. For instance, our one of our commandments is to honor your father and mother. And Jesus actually likens honoring your father and mother to taking care of your father and mother, even financially in the Gospels, because he addresses how the Pharisees and Sadducees were some people that what was due to the temple or due to what was due to the temple that they shouldn't give to their parents who were in need over giving to the temple. So he likens the honoring your father and mother to actually taking care of them physically. But the voice of the Lord, just like he told his disciples, the voice of the Lord told them to follow him, and they left behind parents and households and wives and jobs. So the voice of the Lord triumphs. And when we talk about the realm of submission, and she was submitted on the highest level of being a wife to the voice of the Lord through the voice of her husband. And I could just say that simply as voice of her husband. Next one was presenting herself as his sister in Egypt. Abraham asked Sarah to tell the Egyptians she was his sister rather than his wife to protect his life. Sarah complied, even at personal risk of being taken to Pharaoh's household, which did occur. So Sarah was put in danger by Abraham's desire. Abraham's desire was to save his own life. She was put in danger by being brought into by saying that that she was his sister. She was taken into Pharaoh's household. She could have been he could have tried to have sex with her, which was likely what was going to happen, and God intervened. She could have been raped. She could have been all types of things because that wasn't his wife and he wasn't protecting her. But she did what was right without fear. She did not fear. And I want to also note because she was submissive to her husband, God protected her. He divinely stepped in and intervened and addressed Pharaoh directly about this to not touch her. Many people don't understand what's the point of this story. The point of the story really isn't about Abraham. It's about learning from Sarah about being the bride and being willing to do whatever her husband told her to do, which is the same way we should be with Jesus. Even when it doesn't make sense, even when it sounds wild, even when it seems like it puts us ourselves in danger, we should be willing to do what he tells us to do. Next one says, presenting him as a sister again in Gerar. Sarah repeated the same act of defense when Abraham made the same request before Abimelech, king of Gerar. Same thing happened again. He did the same thing. She willingly submitted. God showed up again. And interesting enough, the first time he was Abram, the second time he was Abraham. And I think there's a reason why this story happens twice. Not only as Abram when he is before he's circumcised, but also as Abraham, he's given a new name. not only in his ungodly state, but also in his godly state, his cleansed state. Why? Because the truth is, Jesus will ask us to do some things that maybe you would not expect someone holy to ask someone to do, or be in a certain situation, or whatever it may be. But the truth is, whether it was before Abraham was circumcised or after Abraham was circumcised, this was an asking of Sarah, and she willingly obeyed it. Last one, she called Abraham Lord. When Sarah overheard the promise of a son and laughed inwardly, her private thoughts included referring to Abraham as Adonai, which First Peter 3:6 later highlights as the defining example of her submissive posture. And so, even down to the thoughts of her heart, we just talked about pure, right? Even down to the thoughts of her heart, she addressed Abraham as Lord. So it wasn't just outward acts of submission, and this is where submission is even deeper. Because, like I say, he sees the thoughts of our heart. It's not about are we just doing the outward acts of submission, but deep down in the thoughts of our heart, are we grumbling? Are we against it? Are we doubting? Are we speaking against the direction of the husband who is Christ in this sense? And this class is great because honestly, I mean, for a lot of women, you learn about being. This is probably the ultimate compilation of lessons on being a wife, which is not something I've talked about at all in Kingdom School. But inside of your heart is the husband, is Christ. Is he really Lord in your heart? When you address him, is he Lord? Or is it just outwardly? Outwardly I show this thing of war. I sing the songs and call him Lord. I do all these different things, but anywhere in my heart I grumble against him. I doubt him. I question his direction and his instruction. I strife with his what he believes is right and what he's telling us to do. Deep down in my heart, I don't really trust where he's taking me. Which brings us to our examples of fear of submittance. Because we have two huge examples of people in the Bible that feared to submit, and there was grave consequence also for this. The fear of submittance. We'll start with Kadesh Barnea, and this is coming into the promised land. Numbers 13 and 14. The most prominent example, the 12 spies returned from Canaan, and 10 gave a fearful report about the giants, Nephilim descendants, the Anakim. The people wept, rebelled, and even talked about appointing a new leader to return to Egypt. Only Caleb and Joshua urged trust in God. The result was 40 years of wilderness wandering and the death of that entire generation before entry. So, what happened here? He had been leading them this whole time, giving this instruction, telling them this is where we're going. This is God I'm talking about. The Lord is leading them. He's telling where he's going. He said, we have a promised land for you. I have a place for you. When they get there, 10 of the spies, 10 of the 12, 10 spies were fearful. And I see even a bigger picture with that as I talk about it now. But 10 gave a fearful report. So they spoke against. It made people fear submitting to God's desire, his plan, his voice. And I think anyone that's married, to be honest with you, can liken this. Because I believe there's these spiritual battles come against every married person. There's always going to be some small. It can range from small to huge, and a lot of women get fooled because they think they're alone in this. But it can range from small to huge. There's always some voice making you doubt, having fear about being completely submitted to the husband and what he's telling you to do. But 10 out of 12, that's a majority of the voices, were making them fear being submitted and doing what the Lord told them to do. What was the consequence? None of them entered into the promised land. None of that generation, except those two, they came back with a pure perspective of what God was telling them to do. And this is a great example of voice rather than the general commandments, because there's no general commandment. There was no that's not a part of the general morality of God is entering a promised land. That's the voice of the Lord told them to do. But they weren't submitted. They weren't submitted. And they feared the submission. Even better way to say it. Next one, Saul disobedient, rooted in fear of the people. So when confronted by Samuel about his failure to fully obey God's command to destroy the Amalekites, Saul confessed directly, "I feared the people and obeyed their voice." His disobedience to God was driven by fear of human opinion, which God treated as rejection of his kingship over Israel. And I think that we're seeing clearly here by now the greatest enemy to submittance is human opinion. If you have not got it yet, it's human opinion. Because the opinions of the people, Saul did not completely obey the voice of the Lord. And he thought partially obeying and reasoning in this one area was okay. And no, God took his spirit from him. He rejected him. He no longer wanted him to be king. In the same way, it was the human opinion with the Israelites when they came in the promised land that deterred that killed a whole generation from entering into what was promised to them. And I'm trying to tell you the same thing is going to happen today. Christ gives us many specific um, uh, um, or much specific direction, even just in the Gospels of what to do. That's just beyond the general revelation of what's right and wrong. And I'm trying to tell you, it's human opinion. Human opinion is the greatest enemy to submittance, because what someone else thinks, it defiles your ability to see clearly that what's right is listening to God and what's wrong is not listening to God. What's right is being submitted. What's wrong is not being submitted. It's really as simple as that. But what happens is the human opinion comes and says, but is that really the right thing to do? Is this really moral? Is this really the right thing to do? Whatever it is. And it's right to do what he says. It's kind of like going all the way back to Genesis 3, right? It's as simple as that. The devil what? Making them question God to deter their submittance. Now, I want to give some examples of radical instruction, and I put radical in quotations because it's radical to us just because what we're used to. I don't really believe that it's radical to God whatsoever, and I don't believe it's radical at all. I think it just is. But Abraham sacrificed his son. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, whom was promised to him by God. And these are some examples of. I mean, these are we see this. I'm not saying that God's going to ask you to do that. I mean, that's not in the Gospels. But I am giving you examples of that God asks people to do some radical things, and this is also actually another. And he was actually testing his submittance. He was testing submittance, and this is also another example of how obeying the voice of the Lord is greater than the commands, right? Because we have the commands. Obviously, one of the commands is do not murder, but the voice of God told him sacrifice your son. And that's where sometimes, and I believe this is where there can be a conflict between law and the voice of Christ, because what is the voice of Christ telling you to do? Now, is it really ever really telling you to break the law? He was testing Abraham, and he didn't actually kill his son. So let's keep it there for 1 second. Now, the other prophet who killed his daughter, who had to kill his daughter because he made a vow, the vow situation is part of the law of God, and he had to fulfill his vow. Next one, prophetic sign acts. So Ezekiel 4, Hosea 1, God often asked prophets to perform public bizarre acts to get people's attention. This included Ezekiel lying on his side for 390 days and cooking food over cow dung, or Hosea being told to marry a wife of prostitution to illustrate God's relationship with Israel. As Hosea, so we have precedent of one. He may ask you to treat family a certain way, and honestly, to me, that's even a parable because he literally said, if you don't hate your father, hate your mother, hate your wife, hate your children, hate your brother, hate your sisters, even your own life, you're not worthy of being mine, right? Well, we see the physical parable in that in Abraham and his son, but here, so we see the voice of the Lord can tell you how to relate to family. Just like, I mean, we're talking about a husband here, and some of us think that husbands shouldn't step into that lane. But this is what the husband who is Jesus, he does step into that lane, even that part of our lives, all parts of our lives. He wants to give us direction and be the head of. We see Ezekiel lying on the side for 390 days and cooking food over cow poop. I don't know what category to put that in, but it's radical, isn't it? He tells Hosea to marry a wife of prostitution. So in the matter of who you're in a relationship, yes, and this is where the parable gets kind of, like I said, you have to get out of the flesh marriage mindset when you think of this, because yes, it's a marriage, but he also tells you who to marry, who to deal with, who to be intertwined to. He told Hosea to marry a prostitute. So even in that lane of Hosea's life, he will give instruction. In our lives, he's willing to give instruction of what to do. But are we submitted enough to accept it? And then this is just the discipleship way, right? Sell possessions and give to the poor. It's in Luke, it's in Mark, it's also in Matthew. I didn't put that one on there. In a consumer-driven culture, they equate success with accumulating wealth, and that's in let's speak about America because that's where I am. So Jesus challenges followers to treat possessions as tools for radical generosity. That is radical. That's radical to us, to sell all your possessions and give to the poor. And the truth is, after he died, resurrected, and we already went through the story in Acts with the husband and wife that held back what they had. This was a continued expectation of everyone coming into discipleship, and still is today. Now we're going to wrap this up. So John 2, 1 to 5. I got two concluding passages I wanted to kind of give the essence of what today was about. So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? With us? I'm sorry. My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." And that what Mary's attitude is the attitude that we have to have as brides, as wives, as the wives of Christ, okay? Whatever he says to us, we do it. You do it. There is no measuring his moral compass of what's right and wrong. What's right is listening to him. What is not right is not listening to him. It's as simple as that. We don't have to think, we can rest. right? Submittance equals rest. We just talked about that. We can rest and just know and just listen. We don't have to weigh the balance of right and wrong. We don't have to think of, oh, is this the right thing to do? Is this the wrong thing to do? If he said it, if it's the red letters, it's right, and we do it. We might think the spirit, the Jesus speaking to us through the spirit inside of us. If it's within the bounds of those red letters and doesn't transgress what he said, we do it. It's as simple as that. We don't have to think about outcomes. We can trust that everything is working for our good when we submit and do what he tells us to do, the one who's in control of all. Last one, John 21:18 to 19. It says, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. Now, this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. So what is he saying? Once again, I mean, this brings together many concepts for us. Okay, one, we talk about how it's in the maturity side. Submission is on the ultimate maturity side. It's in the seventh day. So he says, when you're mature, when you grow up, someone else will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. He's also admitting that in submittance to him, he's going to put you in situations you don't really want to be in. You wouldn't have wanted to be in. But at this point, when you become mature, your desire is to obey, is to submit. Another concept, we talked about follow me as being the voice of the Lord. Well, guess what? He likens this maturity and growing up and being dressed and being led to accepting the call to follow me. And think about this as a wife. He's literally telling him, listen, when you grow older, when you were younger, you walk where you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands. So when you stretch out your hands, he's saying that, listen, it's willing. No one's forcing you. Stretch out your own hands. I'm stretching out my hands. And someone else, which is him, will gird you. I'll dress you. I'll put your clothes on your body. And I'll bring you. I will lead you. I will take you where you not want to go. Do we think that Sarah wanted to leave her hometown? Do we think that Sarah wanted to act like Abraham's sister twice in Egypt and Gerar? Do we believe? No. But once again, that's why she's the mirror image of the mature and perfected wife that we've given, the free wife that we're given this example of in the New Testament. Now, this was the bride. This is our the lesson for the fifth watch. It's called Daughters of Sarah. We'll be back very soon.